everyone. My name is Joanna, and I'm a junior studying statistics at the college. Today, I'm presenting on my team's hackathon project, which focuses on people who voted for candidates of different parties from 2012 to 2016. So we started off this hackathon thinking about what were some of the surprising aspects of the results of the election. For example, people had assumed that more women would have voted for Clinton, or people had assumed that fewer people who had voted for Romney would have voted for Trump. So ultimately, we reached the research question, how much switching was there between parties in the 2016 election? And then further, how did this behavior differ by group? So for our procedure, we first reduced the data set to the states that we had results for the 2016 election for, and then we subset the data to the validated voters and the self-reporting voters because we weren't sure if there would be a difference between the two groups. With the validated voters, we first compared how they voted in 2012 to how they did in 2016, and then we compared how they voted in the 2016 primaries to how they did in the general election. We did the same for the self-reporting voters, and we didn't see that there was much of a difference, so these next few slides are going to focus on the validated voters. And then finally, we compared how the 2016 candidates performed with different groups who had voted for Obama in 2012. So one of the conventional narratives we heard was that Trump activated new voters with his unconventional campaign. You know, we heard that some people would have been excited to vote because this Washington outsider would come in and drain the swamp. But we actually found it to be the case that of people who didn't vote in the 2012 election, Trump didn't win many more of them than Clinton did. But at the same time, of the people who voted for a third-party candidate in 2012, Trump won 45% of them, while Clinton won 20%. We also heard the narrative that people who voted for Romney in 2012 wouldn't vote for Trump, especially since Romney himself was critical of Trump during the campaign. But here we actually see that Trump won a share of those who had voted for Obama in 2012 that was 2 times larger than the share of people Clinton had won over of the group that had voted for Romney in 2012. Here we switched gears and we were looking at how people voted in the 2016 primaries versus how they voted in the general election. So we see that of validated voters, there was substantial defecting by these so-called never Trumpers and Bernie bros between the primaries and the November election. And of course, a common narrative is that Clinton underperformed with white non-college educated voters who including those who had voted for Obama in 2012. So focusing on the second row, we see the Obama voters who ended up voting for Trump in 2016. So 6% of white female college-educated voters who had voted for Obama voted for Trump, 4% of white male college-educated voters ended up voting for Trump, and so on. So what really jumps out at us is the figures for those who are white female non-college educated voters and white male non-college educated voters, because of course these figures are in the double digits. So that was a quick overview of what we worked on. Thank you to my teammates, and thank you to all of you for listening. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our next panel, New Media 2016. Farthest away from me is Marie Cox. She is the senior political correspondent for MTV News. She also conducts the talk interviews in the New York Times Magazine and hosts the Crooked Media podcast with friends like these. Next to her is Wesley Morris, who is a critic at large for the New York Times and a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine. He's previously written for Grantland and won the 2012 Pulitzer Prize for criticism for his work with the Boston Globe. That's pretty good for a Yale alum. There's no roast of you. Okay, so Jenna Wortham is also a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine. She's written about technology, culture, and identity. She and Wesley together host Still Processing, which was named one of the best podcasts of 2016. Here's News Media 2016.
Wow.
That's usually my role. Like, good job.
Put some water, because that was salty.
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna need some extra light for the shade that just got all over it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our panel on what the fuck happened. But I just want to say to all the data people in the room, you guys are being really hard on yourselves. Do you know who ran for president last year? I mean, I would say that it was maybe the two craziest people you could have run. I mean, I guess one was super inevitable and one was super unexpected. But I think the combination of those two people, I don't know. I mean, better luck in 2020. Yeah. I feel like
it was like the worst choice Americans ever faced, besides like, is Pepsi okay?
I also, I just feel like you guys should give yourselves a little credit. You weren't that far off, I would say.
Yeah.
I would also say that a black polling firm wouldn't feel as bad as some of you guys. I just feel like you should let some of the guilt go. It's okay. But
and
speaking of which,
actually why we were talking about this, about why this maybe, there probably is a black polling firm, but why maybe they wouldn't feel as bad.
Wait, is there? Does anybody know?
Probably.
I mean, there's got to be.
Yeah. And
several.
maybe they would have picked up on some stuff, right?
Yes.
That other polling firms might not have. I did an interview with Reid, who is the host of Morning Joy, right? AM Joy on MSNBC. Delightful interview. And I was talking to her about the election results, and she was like, you know what, I actually wasn't that surprised. And I asked her, where did this marvelous insight come from? And she said, well, Clinton basically ran telling black people, if you vote for Trump, there'll be a racist in the White House. And black people were like, yeah? Like, tell me how that's going to be different than the last 250 years. You cannot scare people by telling them that this really angry white man will be running the country. It just doesn't, the delta, is just not that extreme for them, and especially when the other candidate is Hillary Clinton, who really, and this is something we've talked about today, really underperformed with African Americans. And that is something that I had, people in my life who were people of color telling me, actually, again, before the election happened, that she was missed. People who they knew who had been active in Obama campaigns or voted for Obama in places like Milwaukee, in places like Philadelphia, she wasn't around and wasn't doing the kinds of stuff that Obama had. And I just feel like if she had done that stuff, we've talked about this a little bit, the story we're telling right now is about what amazing diverse country we have. Like how Latinos turned out and African Americans turned out, and look at how awesome we are. I mean, and that would have been as untrue.
Yeah, I mean, if the outcome had been different, we probably would be talking about, actually the nature of this conference would even be different, right?
There'd probably be less people here, less hand-wringing, for sure.
But I also wonder whether or not whether, at least to me, it just seemed quite obvious what could happen. I mean, I wasn't running around saying Donald Trump is going to win, but I also wasn't shocked by the probability that he could. Once he got on the ticket, I mean, he made it to the ticket. Yeah. He beat all those other people.
Trevor Noah also said something like this, I think, to me and other people too, which is that once he got on the ticket, Trevor Noah was like, do you guys know your country?
Right, I just feel
Are you familiar with America? Because that guy is the guy America wants.
I also don't think that there was, I also don't believe there was much more Hillary Clinton could have done. Right? I mean, she could have come with less baggage, but that would have meant that she could have seen 2016 from 1982. Even though she technically could, but she couldn't have seen who she was running against from back then.
You can't
Do you know
be
what I mean?
a Clinton and make a character argument. I mean,
no, which was one of the things she tried to run on.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys a question, though? I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before, but, had we had better, quotes, data, better polling information, do you think, what would we have done differently, and do you think it would have mattered in terms of what we know now about racial resentment, economic anxiety? Would it have amounted to a different outcome if we had been hit to the Trump's game earlier?
But we were hip. I feel like the data. Sorry.
This is
sorry.
the question,
this
though.
is right. Yes.
No, because all the coverage of Trump was, he's a buffoon. He's a carnival barker. We were in meetings constantly, where editors, mostly white editors making these decisions, were saying like, there's no way, and all the brown people in the room were going like, okay, well, so
yeah. I saw that to be true. I think a lot of white people, speaking as a white person, very, very white person, I hope I'm not hurting anybody with my reflective skin. I think there was a tendency, I think I kept on wanting to believe, of course, please, this is not going to happen. I think that especially happened in analysis and in assumptions that were made about college-educated white women. Mm-hmm. And we're the non-data panel. Like I was actually the quote that John Sides made before about like political analytics is the worst way to look at politics except for all the other things. We're all the other things. And we're not even like real journalists, like in the sense like we're opinion.
Jenna is. Jenna.
Well, but I know what you're saying. I mean, like we're opinion, like explicitly criticism and opinion and analysis, and I guess one of the things that I wanted, but I am now very conscious of the fact that when I was doing even though admittedly, opinion, like I was looking at the data and looking at the results and thinking, right, I see this probability here, but I just can't believe it. Mm-hmm. I think if I was not a white person, I may have been able to believe it. That's actually the thing that I think is the difference, is that believability of the chance. Mm. We were talking about this over lunch about, it's one thing to like know intellectually that a probability may happen, mm-hmm. but it's another thing to like be able to internalize it and be able to believe that it's a real thing. Mm. And I think that's where diversity in newsrooms, and not just diversity in newsrooms, but diversity at the top and in directing coverage could have made a difference.
But I guess what I'm wondering is if we had been covering it more seriously, would it have mattered? Could we have changed the outcome? That's what I'm wondering.
No, I don't know. I just don't see the point.
Is that the point of coverage? But
well, I also don't know. I think there are a lot of things. I think if anything, there was a bias. I think the ultimate bias is against this belief that a person, the delusion, I think. It's not even a bias. We're sort of past bias. Bias is something that, I think that's a term that's been given to the media. I think it's more like a delusion. I think there's a delusion that Donald Trump represented for a lot of people, sort of very much along the lines of what you're talking about, in terms of who we think we are as Americans. Mm-hmm. Right. It's the same thing that got Barack Obama elected.
Everybody thought
And to some extent, Bill Clinton, I mean, like the message that you run on is the thing that you were ultimately endorsing, right? Mm-hmm. And and we were talking about this earlier, I actually don't know what, as a voter, I am voting for Hillary Clinton. I don't know why I'm voting for her message-wise, right? Mm-hmm. But if I'm voting for Donald Trump, it's quite clear. And it's not just the thing that's on the baseball cap, it's all the stuff that the thing on the baseball cap represents, right?
Right.
And if I feel endangered as a voter, as a demographic, right? If I'm a white working class person, which is a term that we can unpack for a second, and everything that it means or doesn't mean, but like, just forget white. If I'm a white person and I feel threatened or endangered by whatever we think is happening in this country,
anxiety,
and whatever I'm anxious about that's been going on, at least in my politics, in my electoral politics at the national level, since from like 2007 till last year. And there's a guy who is speaking to my anxiety. Not even secretly, by the way. I mean, it's not like, You don't have to be smart to hear anything he's offering you. He's just fucking offering
We went
it.
from the dog whistle to the cat call.
Right. I mean, like that.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's not a lot to miss. I think that the story that you wind up telling doesn't change too much because the alternative, like his opponent, doesn't have a narrative. She had nothing she could run on.
Well,
I mean, she did. No. If she were able to have run a policy campaign.
And this actually, I will say a little bit, is where actually I do fault the media some, is that she actually did have a policy. She had policy.
Of course she did. Yes.
You know,
I
like
agree.
the opioid epidemic is an issue that I care about a lot and follow. And she put out a detailed plan about not just the addiction epidemic, but about mental health issues. She was the first major political candidate to put out like a serious policy proposal solely devoted to mental health issues. And I think that was the same month as the pussy tape. So it like, you know, no one found out about it. We have a questionable mental health at the top of the ticket, but no discussion
of the policy that could
of the
have
actual policy. And it was
helped
there
this
for people
person.
to cover. It was there for
Right.
people to cover. And just no one, you know.
I will correct that and just say that I think that she had nothing to run on against this particular person, I guess.
She had no character argument.
Right.
I shouldn't say no.
She couldn't make one, as you said earlier.
She had a very difficult time making a character argument because of
All that baggage.
who she is. What else?
I mean, I guess one of the things, since some of the other panels didn't really have time for questions, I guess we're going to keep talking, but if anybody has any questions they want to ask, you should feel free
We
to.
should just, we're going to start. You guys are smart.
Also, I would
See how the
also
panel
ask, I mean, there's, like, we're in a room full of data people, and I guess the question I'm really curious about thinking about is what, because I tended to think about this stuff as, you've spent a lot of time trying to correct me against believing this, but that the data is neutral, right?
Oh, yeah.
That the information that we're given from these objective polling sources and from these models is untainted by the people handling it. And your point to me is always that no, idiot, there are people handling it.
Well, Nate
And
Silver
it
made
is-
that point
right.
well earlier, which was kind of great. That there are biases underneath other biases that we don't always correct for, which is interesting too.
And
So-
so the way we talk about the data too, which like you made the reference to white working class. Working class is just not a thing, you know? Like, I mean, we can talk about educational attainment, we can talk about income. There's no, what is work, you know? And you know what, if you've ever been poor or know someone who's poor, being poor is fucking hard work. Like if you want to talk about people who are like putting hours into the day to make their lives livable, like working class doesn't like stop at the poverty line, you know?
No.
Right.
And also working class doesn't, I mean, I think for a long time in this election, people did not put, it was weird, it was a lot of working class. I think recently in the last few months, we've seen people put white working class on it as a distinguishing term. We don't see a lot of talk about the people of color working class. It's like a term that just doesn't exist.
Well, I was really struck by that, by the way that data broke down in the presentation that preceded us.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, and this is true in a lot of the published data that I see, which, you know, white people come in many different classes and categories, but people of color are just the people of color, like Asians, Latinos, blacks. We don't know if we have a college education.
Right.
We don't know if we go to church. We don't have ages.
You don't
we
know
don't
if,
have
like,
like it's just blacks.
Latinos don't know if you're Caribbean or
Right. I
Central
mean, oh my God,
American or
don't even go down that
Oh, yeah,
rabbit
right,
hole. I mean, how dare you make the distinction among Latinos?
Yeah, right.
I just feel like there are things that, you know, I can't say that if I were at a polling firm or at a you know, a data outfit, that I would sort of that I would raise my hand and be like, well, you know, you guys, black people also do and don't go to college, and Asians do and don't go to college.
But it tells a really interesting story about, we're talking about narratives and what matriculates into the mainstream, but it tells a really interesting story about what captures our attention and what mysteries we want to unlock. It's like we're so curious about whiteness. We're so curious about this mysterious white working class, as though we're not all like, you know what I mean? Like we don't know kind of what that means to some degree. We have family that falls into those various brackets that we sit down and break bread with every holiday season, you know, or whatever it is. But it's so that's sort of what the thing that strikes me is that when we think we know how black people feel, which is why we don't bother to interview any of them, and why we talk to white coal miners and not black coal miners, because they also exist, you know.
Right.
And so that's a part of sort of how we think about shaping the narrative and sort of the stories we tell around this election.
But it also points immediately to, I mean, and I don't want to be another person advancing this problem, but I mean, we work in the problem in a lot of ways, right? Like the idea, the connection that the people who work in the media by and large, being white, the disconnection between them and the people that they claim not to understand vis-a-vis their coverage is kind of amazing to me sometimes.
But is it though? Because
not amazing. But
You mean like I probably understand white working class people a lot better than I'm pretending to?
No.
Or
I think it's a failure to identify with like those people. Like it was the reaction in certain places in this country the day after the election, the sense of shell shock.
The sense of shell shock, but then coupled with, I heard my dad say something, I heard my neighbor say something, you know, when I went home for the holidays, everyone was saying X, Y, and Z, but I didn't think it was a big deal. And that's sort of what I was trying to say before, not that it's our responsibility to change an election, no, but if we had taken it seriously as we took it on November 9th, what would the outcome have looked different, or would we have would we not be like so, you know, like in this position of not understanding how did we get here, because we ignored all the signs leading up to it.
Right. I also think that there is something to the way those questions get asked and those groups get further explained and stratified. I think that throughout the history of this country, you know, non-white people had never really been thought of by white people as anything other than their block. So the idea that you would think of them as anything other than black people, because it just is a foreign concept. And it never gets represented in any sort of alternative way, as far as I'm concerned, right? And so that's what, I mean, when you think about, for instance, a black Republican's first job as a black Republican is to define himself as different from all those other black people, right? I'm the black person who has thought for myself, made myself who I am, and has gotten away from all those.
Pulled up my pants.
Like the black people as a identity block.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that I think white people have never had to think of themselves that way.
We don't have to practice respectability politics, or we're learning actually that we have to a little bit now. Like we're having to, like,
well, that's exactly what happened.
Get our boy. Like when somebody like Bill O'Reilly makes fun of Maxine Waters. Like Kamau Bell has this great riff about how white people should be practicing respectability politics for white people.
Yeah.
Like we should have more racial pride, basically. Like clean up after the people that are assholes. Like when Bill O'Reilly makes fun of Maxine Waters' hair, like we need to be like, he should pull his pants up and get a job. You know, like the same way that Bill Cosby talks about, you know, whatever the youths that he used to patrol.
Right.
You know, respectability patrol. And I think there is some of that happening now. I think there is some of that, and you're seeing it in the coverage. I think I see in a lot of the mainstream coverage of the white coal miners, of the people in Ohio that are facing the opioid epidemic. I see a lot of guilt in that, and a lot of like confusion and like, how did this happen? Like, how did these people that I thought I knew like do this thing? And in some quarters I see it as anger too. Like there have been some really, and I will say I find them heartbreaking stories coming out of like places like Kentucky, where there was a story in the Washington Post interview. A reporter went down there and talked to the people that came to this, you know, federally funded, largely Medicaid subsidized health clinic, and all these Trump voters, you know, getting their health care via Kentucky Care, which is the Medicaid expansion paid through by Obamacare, and they were just, they either didn't, some of them didn't realize Obamacare was the same thing,
Right.
but it's actually, they just didn't believe that Trump would take it away from them.
Right.
They just didn't believe, and I think there's some whiteness there. Like,
Sure.
really?
I mean, well, think about the fact that, just think about what it means to repeal and replace Obamacare.
Right.
And the idea that we're kind of like going down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but the signifiers all connect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this thing, the degree to which we can't talk about racism and whiteness in relation to other people's nesses is still here.
Of course.
You know, it is still in like the way some of the polling gets done. I mean, I like to know what some of the questions are that get asked to arrive at some of those numbers, right? Like how there was I guess 2 presentations ago, it was not the actual panel, but the
hackathon
presentation.
about the racial,
The one,
conservative
the
racial
most, the
activity.
conservative races,
right.
or
I felt bad for conservatives.
racial conservatism.
Like,
and-
maybe you should have called it like racial something else. Like,
So racial resentment or just racism and racial conservatism was kind of, as a sort of compromise term, was we were looking at those questions and we were like, there's a little bit of politics in them. And also doesn't cover all the kinds of racism that we saw.
Yeah.
So much racism.
yeah. I love that there's a scale though. Like I want to take.
Well,
that to
this is
my
the thing that
in-laws
I find
immediately.
On that scale.
right. Like is 8 out of 10? That's you get up and leave,
the
right?
acceptable level, right? Like
No,
what
I mean, listen,
or
there
is it the
is
one drop theory?
there's a one drop rule to racism where like, well, no, there's a reverse one drop
Yeah,
rule.
right,
Like
right.
I can stay through the whole dinner if you do the following 15 things, but once you get to like 4, I'm
tipping
out.
point.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a-
Well, we talked about my story about a member of my family that I will not name the exact person, where his racism has, since Trump got elected, like he's gone from saying stuff that I've been like, hey, come on, don't say that. And him kind of being like, okay, I won't say that. To him saying shit that's like overtly racist. And he just looks at me, you know, like daring me.
But you
I mean,
made the
in New York, people say things to me on the street too. Like, I mean, there is a boldness to what I mean. There is something that's been unleashed
Yeah.
for sure.
Those shy Trump voters, man, I wish they'd get shy.
But I would also say that this is a thing that is pretty apparent, though. In like, I said to you that I think your father, or like the equivalent of, or that's not your father. It's not her
Not my
father, by the
father.
way.
It's not my
I had to
father.
slip of the tongue. It's not her father.
Not my father, who is
it-
awesome.
In that person's Facebook feed, he probably
Right.
was
That's a good point.
like saying all of these things, and you would know,
Right.
and I would know, and Jenna would know, but among his
And was
friends,
seeing even worse things.
right, and
felt normalized.
and it felt
yeah.
perfectly acceptable among these people. And I think what happened, I mean, we all know what happened, right? This guy runs for president and in some way begins to espouse these things that were privately, you know, any person polling different people's Facebook feeds would have found all of this stuff and could have drawn a clear path to Donald Trump. And whether or not he knew it, he definitely knew that the sentiment existed among a significant proportion of the populace. You know, I mean, it's so funny that this idea that New York, that version of that person is foreign to New Yorkers, when anybody who's ever spent any person of color anyway, has spent any time in New York knows that it's everywhere.
Yeah.
You really can't hide from that. Unless you're like at David Remnick's house or something. Do you know what I mean? Otherwise,
it's all your time with David
Right.
Remnick. Would probably be.
Anyway, this is so we're gonna let if
seems
people
like
have
a
any
lovely
questions.
fellow,
We have
actually.
25 minutes. We'll keep talking. You guys can ask questions.
All right. Oh, yay.
There's so many.
So one of the themes in what you guys have been talking about is, in the election occasion, is this, you know, do we understand the world the way we think we should because we're all living in relatively homogeneous networks, whether that's on social media or elsewhere. Obviously, that's a lot of that's directed at the media. You know, you live in your liberal bias, your liberal bubbles, blah blah blah. So, I mean, there's a sort of a there are more or less persuasive versions of that critique. I'm sure you guys have heard a range. There are more or less mean-spirited versions of that critique, which you guys have heard. What I'm genuinely curious about, whether you're working as a critic, you know, as Wesley and Anna Marie, or as an opinion writer, or as a reporter like Jenna, have you guys thought differently about your own way of getting empirical information about the world, or how you should think and write as a critic or as a reporter? I mean, is anything different for you now? I'm not saying asking the question is not because I'm suggesting that it should be. I'm actually asking it in a completely agnostic way, because I'm just genuinely curious if it's been different for you as a consequence of the election.
Well, it's funny you should ask. I happen to have a podcast on crooked media called With Friends Like These. And I started it because of the election, basically. The conceit is to talk across differences. I bring to it a personal resume of having married into a very conservative family, having had the experience of my husband actually getting woke. He would hate that. He would really hate if I said that. Basically, he'd been a fairly conservative person when we first met. We've been together for like 5.5 years. He voted for Hillary Clinton. Even though I told him, you don't have to for me, and he was like, come on. I was like, no, you can vote for Gary Johnson or whatever. And then we're in Minnesota, so I'm actually really glad he voted for Hillary Clinton. But and then I also have been in recovery and therapy for a long time. And that's relevant because I have a lot of experience, at least in my personal private life, of trying to listen to people without judgment. Mm-hmm. And as long as we're talking about and praying for people who I disagree with, and trying to see in other people the things that I both can love and the things that I might not like about myself. And to try and come to conversations without the goal of agreeing with each other, which I think does not happen very often in American culture, in media, wherever. Mm-hmm. People always come to a conversation if they disagree, even if it's to find common ground, like you have a definition of what that common ground is, right? And so this podcast is an attempt, only been doing it for like 6 weeks, to try and just have a conversation without maybe necessarily getting to, I'm not out there I'm not trying to convince anybody. The logo for the podcast is a George Washington in a MAGA hat and George Washington in a pussy hat, which fits in the larger crooked media schema. But I should tell people it is not just about left-right. This week's podcast is actually about disability rights and about kind of listening on maybe basically being both on the left side of the political spectrum, but what differences do we have and can we talk about? And it may be awkward, but like tell me what I need to hear. Mm-hmm. So that is like a very both personal and professional thing, I guess, that I really have tried to actually do something.
Sounds cool.
Did you?
It's not changing the way I take in information necessarily, but it is changing. I felt like I came into the second half of November with a much clearer sense of what I wanted my role to be as a journalist and what I wanted my role to be as a reporter. So the things that are really near and dear to me, anxiety, mental health and depression, and how people cope and deal with things like daily experiences and exposure to racism, and how we think about that and talk about that and treat it has become a priority in terms of my reporting. Whereas before I would have been like, oh, this is something I'm interested in, but now I'm like, it's actually critical to think about writing about what people I feel and myself are suffering from. And I've also become really interested. I write about culture, but I mostly look at the tech industry and kind of watching the pendulum swing from, being very pro-Obama and seemingly very progressive, and then watching, of course, like one by one, all the big tech companies tweet their support of Trump, and watch all the Obama, staff members who came from various startups after they sold them trickle out and see their morose Facebook posts, gotten very interested in what the history of the Valley actually is and sort of the founding principles of the techno-libertarian ideals and what that means about what we can expect as these companies get, I mean, they're already huge, but as they get bigger. So it's kind of shaping what my priorities are, the same way Anna Marie was saying, sort of what you spend your time into. But I do feel like I'm trying to be much more aware of the things I'm seeing that either confirm what I already believe or just being really aware of kind of how, that there are these invisible, shutters over the things that I'm taking in. So sometimes that is not just relying on my feed and realizing that it is a feed that is curated by an invisible hand that I can't see and don't understand how it works. So there is a lot of kind of that mental reorienting that I'm trying to do as well.
I will just say that I've changed nothing.
Yeah, I was gonna.
Everything's the same.
That is the most Wesley thing ever. Oh my God.
No, I will say that the
Never
difference.
explain, never apologize.
An important difference for me, I will say, is that I ask more questions now of things that I probably would have taken for granted before. I guess I was, and Jenna knows this very well, like I am naive about a lot of things that I just feel like I have. Well, I mean,
I really wouldn't say that.
I just don't ask questions that I think I should be asking sometimes.
You only ask questions.
Well, right, but now I'm asking
Okay.
extra questions,
Okay.
I guess is maybe
Alright,
what I'm
right.
saying. And I think that's a difference. And I think this idea of, I had a really existential experience with this election insofar as this question of what is real and what is true is concerned. I always think I know, but anybody who, any sort of self-engaged, self-aware person, anybody who's been subjected to too much philosophy, anybody's done a lot of drugs, you do wind up asking yourself questions about like truth and
What is real?
and what's real.
Have you ever really looked
and-
at your hand?
Right, I mean,
How do we know?
and I have spent a lot of time trying to asking those questions, like mainly in the context of this sort of larger question of fake realities. But also, I guess my problem is that it's more that I'm more likely to be empathetic. So the question I'm actually asking is, do these other people have a point? Is this fake news actually fake, or what? Is there a kernel of realness there? My mind has not been changed, but just the idea that I'm spending an extra, 20 minutes a day asking another set of questions on top of the ones I was already asking. That is definitely a difference for me versus, I would say, even like 6 months ago.
Sorry, I took charge. But she did the racism scale, so I'm curious.
My question isn't actually about that, I'm afraid. It's about what you guys might expect or hope would happen in America and in the media, particularly, perhaps, but also just widely in society. If in 2020 Donald Trump loses the election, does America just sort of wake up the day after and say, that was weird, all right, okay, fine. Or what does America do, and what should America be doing?
I think we'll probably have a preview on 2018.
Do you know what, you asked that question, and I was like, where are the data people? Like I was like, Nate, you can answer that. But I think it would be dangerous to solely be like, wow, that was weird, right? Because it wasn't that weird.
It wasn't that weird.
It really wasn't. I mean, the shit that is actually happening right now under this administration is weird. But the fact that he won does not strike me as terribly weird.
Yeah, and that's the point. I guess our discussion about diversity in the newsroom and about like perspectives really goes towards it. It's not that weird. So I hope that doesn't happen, because again, all of the currents that we're talking about racism, about like sort of an identity, would be true even if she won. We cannot forget that.
Right, right. We just wouldn't be talking about it this way, and I think that is such an American way of dealing with all of this shit. Which is like, a good thing happened, so let's forget all that fucking bad shit.
Right.
Like that was the dumb lesson of Obama.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
and look what we got, motherfuckers. That guy.
He was our black friend.
Right. I mean,
So
well,
we couldn't be racist. We had
Right.
a black friend.
Right,
You know,
right.
he just happens to live in the White House. I do think 2018 is going to give us a little bit of a preview about what kind of reactions we might have if, like, let's say there's some significant increases in Democrats winning some seats, and that also could tell us like what Trump is capable of as far as. I've been talking about this with a lot of people. I mean, I think there's a sense that if he is back up against the wall and cannot govern like an insane, right winger, maybe he will govern like an insane left winger. Who knows? Like, right? He has no ideological center, so we'll see. But anyway, so I hope we don't forget.
I have
either
a
way.
crazy question though. Would that be a useful metric of where we actually are though? Like, what really would have changed, I guess? I don't know. We wouldn't be that different from whoever we were 4 years before that. And all what would have been purged? I mean, the people we elected want to do this purging, but like it's not as though kicking them out of power or like taking their power away changes the constituencies that gave them the power.
Or are you talking? Who is the theys and the?
Like
guy
Trump voters,
lost and
it is the people who voted for Donald Trump.
Right.
Where are they going?
Oh, yeah, they're not.
And I
well,
think the question really is very much along the lines of your show and that the polling that had been done by somebody on the identity politics panel that just showed over time how more deeply red the country's gotten in like there'd be these pockets of light blue. I think that like trying to find, and this is a very sort of hokey or corny way of thinking about this, but I actually do think that it like prolonged and meaningful exposure to different people is important. And I don't think that is a phony way of thinking about changing stuff.
Right, and the question that I always come back to, or what I'm really curious about too, is because we're so inundated, and we talk about filter bubbles, we talk about the bubbles we choose to live in, and surrounding ourselves by like-minded people, which is all true. But I also wonder if because we're inputting, or we're like trying to digest so much information all the time, or when we like go to our different portals and are looking, and we're seeing all these people that most of which agree with us, some of us maybe don't. But like, do we feel like we're connecting? Do we feel like that's enough? Does that make us feel like, because the one dissenting person, like in the comment, you're like, well, I engaged today. Like, I don't know, are we, like, I just wonder what's supplementing that, because I do think we feel like we're getting our full of, I mean, I know, at least for me, like, I'm always like, enough people, like, I've got enough of my,
I use the app that flipped my feed, so I
Right.
guess I've engaged with people I disagree with.
But even that is not, but that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
like, even, is that going to be enough
No,
to
I
sort
mean,
of,
no, it's
right,
not. It's
that's
not.
the question.
I mean,
So it's like an
yeah.
interesting thing to be curious about.
I don't think
No, I think it's real. I think it's coworkers. I think it's neighbors.
But
I
we're
think it's-
in-laws.
Sorry to interrupt.
Right.
No,
it's
In-laws.
in-laws.
But in-laws are the things you only deal with once or twice or 3 times a year, depending on where you live, because there is this trend of
Right.
like, we live in this world where all the things that we use are pushing us more towards individualism. And like there's this idea of like, you don't have to go to the bodega anymore. You don't have to go to the corner store. Someone will come and pick up your laundry, and you don't even have to talk to them. You can just like leave the bag outside the door, as I've done once before, and I will admit it because it happened. But it's sort of like there are these ways. I mean, I don't know. We're not.
Well, I do think though that there is both a positive and negative value in those 3 times a year, right?
Yeah.
So what happens when like this hypothetical family? I mean, I know I could be talking about your actual family, but I'll just make it hypothetical.
Yeah.
When
I'm
you
biracial, and most
when-
of all my white family voted for Trump. So now I'm in this position where 6 months or so ago, my whole family was like, "We're so proud of you for working at the New York Times." And then now in all their feeds, they're like, "The New York Times is full of lies," and I'm like, "Grandma, like what?" Like it's funny, but it's actually been like kind of heartbreaking because I'm like, "Huh?" But
Yeah.
But I will just say that, like, let's just play this out where, you go and have this, there's this interracial dinner or like sexual orientation dinner interclass dinner.
Real melting
Right.
pot. It's like recruitment.
And in some, well, okay, maybe. But at some point, some of those people are going to leave that experience with an anecdote.
Yeah.
And that anecdote will get shared in safe company about like what we call the black friend, or something along those lines.
Yep.
There's a great sort of powerful moment in 6 Degrees of Separation, which somehow is amazingly back on Broadway soon. I'm not plugging. I'm just saying it's really weird. Yeah. But the great scene in that play is toward the end when this woman who has spent all this time with this young black man who has swindled her family out of mostly their dignity and a Kandinsky. Refuses at a dinner party to continue to talk about this guy as a story. And the line, of course, is that, I will not let him become an anecdote. And I think that is a very powerful way of thinking about not just black people, but people who aren't in your sphere, who you brush up against occasionally. But I also think that there is some value in that if it's repeated and prolonged, because it does prevent you, it might not change your politics, but it'll definitely change the temperature of your politics.
Yeah.
And when a person like Donald Trump runs again, it might make that person long for a Mitt Romney or a George W. Bush. Oh, God. Well, listen, lady, you got,
I just can't believe. I just can't.
But
believe.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It makes, I think that is I don't know, that's probably a bad outcome of what my point is, but.
No, the difference is it is 3 or 4 times a year with the same people, and I think the anecdotalization of relationships is kind of bad. If you just have like the one person you happen to meet who...
Oh, here comes Anna Marie with her black friend story.
Yeah, her one black friend
story. From 2 Thanksgivings ago.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's not good.
Right.
That is
Right.
not good.
Right.
But if it's like a relationship that you have, that you continue to develop where that person like is in your life, and if it is a person of color, you get to the point where that person can be like, yeah, you know what, that was... Gosh,
yeah, we heard about your Muslim friend like 6 weeks ago. It's like, just get a new other in your life.
Anyway, we should probably take some more questions.
Yeah.
So, anyone on this side? Yeah, sure. That dude.
Got a question about sort of going forward a little bit, picking up on some things that I just heard. Today there's a couple of rallies with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and I think 2 things. One is the idea that people just voted for Trump and that's why they're now running that piece of the country that they're trying to run. I don't think tells the whole story, and I think that Jane Mayer has gotten into some of it with her work on dark money, the role of the Mercers. Sure. So I think there's another story that hasn't been entirely told yet about what was the covert side of this campaign, and how, that had helped shape the result. But going forward, so I'm kind of curious about that, but also going forward, people are looking for alternatives to the established Democratic Party. And I think this is a part of what I think was missing in some of the coverage, the sort of, do we have to vote for Hillary? Is that the only option we have here after Bernie Sanders or whoever was no longer competitive? So can you get at this question of, is there adequate reporting coverage in what might be called corporate media of this dilemma that Americans are facing of how we build an organized, effective opposition that doesn't have to turn back to George Bush or Hillary Clinton?
Right.
I think you're seeing it. I mean, you're definitely getting coverage that is pointing toward the problem with the 2-party system.
Yeah.
I think the delusion, I think the one interesting thing about the Democrats losing was that it's sort of the bad thing actually, is that it's forestalled this conversation about what the party is, right? Meanwhile, the Republicans are watching they're watching the argument against a 2-party system blow up in their face.
Time.
This is not one party. the Republicans at this point. These people, this is like 4 different operations happening that they can't herd all these cats together to pass any legislation.
Yeah.
Because they don't believe in the same shit.
Yeah.
And I think the same, I don't know if it would have been true in this way if Hillary Clinton had won. But I definitely think that some of the stuff that came out during the campaign was deeply indicative of a split between like progressive liberal politics and conservative liberal politics.
Corporate.
And corporate is, exactly.
Corporate liberal politics.
But at the end of the day, now, and you can hiss or whatever if you want at me, because maybe I'm wrong. I'm just trying to throw this out here. But I think the difference between conservatism and liberalism in the most sort of abstract way, is in the most abstract sense, is that there is a fundamental belief on the spectrum from Bernie Sanders to Hillary Clinton that there's a belief in people. And I mean, okay.
No, I'm actually,
I think it'd be much harder to get her to do some crazy stuff that would hurt people in the way that I think is happening alternatively. And I think that, I'm misexplaining this, I think, but I think that there is a unifying principle among the Democrats that would keep it like notionally together in a way that what's happening with the Republicans to me just doesn't seem similarly or comparatively possible.
Yeah, they seem fractured in a way that the Democrats can't.
And I think that we are much more complicated than a 2-party system. We just are. And I think that the media, I think the coverage of the crack-ups points to the reason I'm able to say this to you is because I read the news. But I think one of the things that probably comes out of this at some point is more reporting on, well, I don't know, we do cover the people who believe this. And I think every election cycle, the third-party candidates, I think, get a lot of press. Yeah. Gary Johnson got a lot of press. Mm-hmm. Jill Stein, I read a lot of Jill Stein stories.
Ed McMullen got so much press, like compared to like, what
I think the question, I think the sort of the corollary to your question is like, will any of that coverage ever produce a change in our democracy?
Well, and you actually, in order for that to happen, we have to have a change in the laws
that
govern this, which speaks to the Jane Mayer reporting. Another question, anybody?
Shannon had one.
Oh.
Hey, I just wanted to ask, this is something that I don't feel like we've really talked about much today, but there was also polling about whether people would be willing to elect a female president. And there's also been a lot of talk about, what conclusions or what can we think about in terms of how Hillary Clinton was covered. Now, she's a unique person, as we've talked about today, in terms of having this very long history. But I'd just be curious to hear.
She's still a woman, though.
She is. She is a lady. I'd just be curious to hear you guys' thoughts on the coverage of her and or the sort of inherent sexism that was brought up, I think, in the country.
I think one thing that it sort of showed is that gender identity is not as unifying as racial identity. Women do not, it was a sense for Obama, you could pretty reliably count on the black vote. He, in his experience, was seen as representative in some ways, even though he had the weirdest biography of anyone, right? The guy has a strange resume and history, and yet there was no, he is one of us. And, there's that showed in the votes. And I think women have actually been socialized to be more competitive with each other and to be more judgmental with each other. And there was not a lot of tolerance or generosity, especially among probably millennial women, for Hillary. And I speak as someone, I had the same experience as, who wrote the great piece? No, there was someone. I think I'm gonna be Rebecca Traister. Wrote the piece about how she used not to like Hillary and sort of became more sympathetic. And it's true. I guess actually, now being over 40, and having my own life experiences, I am a lot more sympathetic to her than I used to be, and I feel a lot more solidarity with her than I used to. And I think that was missing. And I think that some people did some analysis did overstate the solidarity, like the idea that the women would, white women would be so offended by Trump that they'd vote for Hillary. Like it turns out, like my stepmother, she, even after the Access Hollywood tape came out, she was like, but I don't trust her, that Benghazi.
Benghazi.
Like not much I can say. I got nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, okay, we'll get the conference organizers. They get to.
Wait, do you want to ask? Do you want to answer that a little bit?
Oh.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking. I mean, yeah. I think there was. That's a great question. I think there was a lot of reluctance among a lot of younger women I know who really struggled with thinking about how to cover Hillary as a candidate, and also there was a lot of frustration about how she chose to speak to women too. And I think, she had a really cool line of flash tats, and she was definitely on stage with Katy Perry, and she, but she wasn't. There were also lots of videos of her being really dismissive towards young women, and I mean, it was tough. Like it was really tough, and I definitely was privy to a lot of conversations. I mean, I don't really write about politics, so this wasn't something that I was really struggling with, but I was privy to email threads in private rooms where journalists were like, I'm upset with how she is not addressing real issues, or she's treating young women as though all we care about are the fact that she has a cool pantsuit on and not dealing with the things that I want to hear her speak on, maybe for fear of alienation.
Oh.
Sorry. And choosing not to write about her, and choosing not to write about that, making decisions not to write anything. So it was a very weird time to.
And I have anecdata.
Did you hear that? Like, ooh.
Anecdata. With multiple anecdotes, which I'll summarize as when I was doing reporting during the primaries on Hillary Clinton, going to Hillary Clinton rallies, I would ask young women there who were excited. I think there was some unfair coverage about like the lack of excitement. There were plenty of excited young women, working for Hillary. Like, so what excites you about her? And they'd be like, she's awesome. She's whatever they'd name, like she's got this, whatever, health, I don't know, they'd name a bunch of stuff, and I'd be like, and she's gonna be the first woman president. And they'd be like, oh yeah, that too. And it was not like the same, again, sort of the Obama comparison, it was not the same like, oh my God, we made it, this is gonna be amazing, this is gonna be a triumph for me.
That's interesting.
I will also
whereas like, I actually had the experience of like, for my mom, like it was.
My mom too, yeah.
That she had that feeling of like, this is something that is for me.
Right.
And there might be, I don't know if it's racial also, but.
I would.
My mom's white. So
Okay,
I don't know.
I didn't want to make any assumptions.
Yeah.
I was also conversely struck by, and I think about this far more often than I thought I would, but I think a lot about those La Corrupt chants. And they really, 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 they almost make me want to cry whenever I do. Just the idea that you could have that many people that united in something so
Cruel
nasty.
And nasty.
And that the person who is fomenting that, it is making him stronger every time they chant it. I mean, he had an orgasm every time he brought it up. I think he got more satisfaction out of that than Bill
Well,
DeWall.
if he could get hard, he
And-
would.
right, I
but
mean-
I don't think that.
I just feel like there is something, I mean, we can talk about, I mean, it's just interesting how we really do talk about racism more than we think we do. We don't talk about class that much in this country. And I think one of the reasons we talk about racism so much now is because there are enough black people with social media channels to make us talk about it. But I think it's really amazing just pussy grabbing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, his opponent in that election was a woman. And this dude is on tape talking about sexually harassing women. Like, bragging about it.
But emails.
Right, exactly, right. I mean, but that is the degree, I mean, I think we are way more sexist than we are anything elseist. And I think it is so weirdly deep, and it's not for me to unpack really, but I just found that I was so much more disturbed by how Hillary Clinton was treated in this campaign than birtherism, because I guess that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I think that's
That does not, like, none of the racism ever surprises me. There's a lot of white women, you know, like, you can't.
And they voted for.
Right, but I just can't, I don't know. I'm still in shock about that, and I think about that all the time.
We talked through Kurt's question, and Ryan's now going to
sorry.
shut us down. So.
I'm going to shut you down.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to shut you down. So let's thank this last panel.